They told us we were too old to keep, that the state couldn't afford teenagers, that we were low adoption probability, that we'd be better off on our own with a monthly check and a handshake. I was 16. My sister was 12. We had garbage bags for luggage, $340 between us, and the address of a distant cousin who didn't know we were coming. What we found in the basement of that crumbling farmhouse didn't just save us. It became the foundation of everything we built. If you've ever been told you were worthless, that you were too much trouble to keep, I need you to hear this. Stay with me. This story is for anyone who's ever had to become their own family. The bus deposited us in Mercer, Pennsylvania, at 11:47 p.m. The station was a gas station with a bench. The air smelled of diesel and dead cornfields, of a town that had been shrinking since the mines closed. I sat on that bench with my sister asleep on my shoulder, her breath warm and even, and I tried not to panic. I'm Noah Brennan. I was 16 years old, legally emancipated by neglect, and responsible for a child who still believed in the tooth fairy. Our parents had died 2 years apart, our father from liver failure, our mother from an overdose that everyone pretended was accidental. The foster system had chewed through 3 placements for me, 2 for my sister Maya, before deciding we were more expensive than we were worth. The cousin's name was Eileen. I'd found her through a genealogy website, a gray tant's daughter who lived on a property that had been in the family since 1847. I'd called once, left a message, received no response. But the address was real, the property taxes were paid, and we had nowhere else to go. I woke Maya gently. She blinked at me with eyes too large for her face, the way she always did when she was trying not to cry. "Are we there?" she asked. "We're close." "Can you walk a little more?" She nodded because she always nodded. Maya was 12 and had learned that agreement was safer than need. I shouldered our bags, 2 garbage bags, the kind with drawstrings, containing everything the state had allowed us to keep, and we started walking. The road was unlit, unpaved in places, following a creek that I could hear but not see. Our phones had died hours ago. The moon was sufficient, casting everything in silver and shadow, making the abandoned barns and collapsed fences look like a landscape of ruins. We found the property at 1:15 a.m. The mailbox said BRENNAN, the letters rusted to orange. The driveway was half a mile of rutted dirt, and by the time we reached the house, Maya was limping from a blister she'd hidden from me. The farmhouse was Victorian, once grand, now sagging. The porch roof bowed in the center. The windows were dark except for one on the second floor, where a blue television flicker suggested someone was awake and alone. I knocked. The sound was too loud, aggressive in the country silence. I knocked again, softer, and heard movement inside, slow footsteps, the kind that suggested age and caution. The door opened 6 inches, chain lock visible. A face appeared in the gap, lined and suspicious, with the pale eyes that ran in our family. "Eileen Brennan," I asked. "I'm Noah, this is Maya, we're your cousins." "Margaret's grandchildren." The face didn't change. "I don't know any Margaret." "Great Aunt Margaret. She died in 1989. She had a sister, Clara." "Clara's daughter was our mother, Patricia." The silence stretched. I could smell the house from the gap, dust, old paper, something medicinal. I could hear Maya's breathing beside me, controlled and careful, the way she breathed during thunderstorms. "You drove here?" Eileen asked. "We took the bus." "From where?" "Pittsburgh." The placement ended. We're family, we didn't have anywhere else. The door closed. I heard the chain slide, then the deadbolt, then the door opened fully. Eileen Brennan was 70, maybe 75, dressed in a housecoat that had been washed to transparency. She looked at Maya first, taking in the garbage bags, the blistered feet, the exhaustion held rigidly in check. "You can stay tonight," she said. "Tomorrow we figure out what you actually want." She didn't hug us. She didn't express sympathy. She showed us to a room with 2 beds that smelled of cedar, brought us water in jelly jars, and closed the door without saying good night. Maya was asleep before I could cover her. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the house settle around us, and allowed myself to hope for the first time since the social worker had handed us our discharge papers. The morning revealed the extent of our inheritance. Eileen was not a collector but an accumulator. Newspapers stacked to the ceiling, mason jars filled with unlabeled contents, furniture that blocked doorways and created maze-like pathways through rooms. The kitchen functioned but barely. The bathroom ran cold water only. The electricity worked in half the outlets. But the property was 47 acres, most of it wooded, with a creek that ran clear and a barn that still stood straight. Eileen had lived alone for 30 years, supported by a teacher's pension and a refusal to acknowledge decay. "You can stay," she told us over breakfast, toast with peanut butter, the kind of meal that suggested limited resources rather than limited care. "But I don't have money for extra mouths. You'll work. You'll earn your keep, and you'll stay out of my way." I agreed because I had to. Maya agreed because she agreed with everything. We spent that first week learning the rhythms of the farm, feeding the 3 chickens that still laid, gathering firewood, clearing the paths that Eileen still walked daily despite the obstacles we'd navigated in darkness. It was Maya who found the cellar. She was exploring, as 12-year-olds do, poking into spaces that adults had learned to ignore. The entrance was in the barn, hidden beneath a rusted plow that hadn't moved in decades. The door was wood, reinforced with iron straps, set into the earthen floor at an angle that suggested age before engineering. "Noah," she called, her voice carrying that particular excitement that cut through my adult worry. "There's something down here." The plow moved with effort, scraping concrete, revealing the full dimensions of the door. It was 4 feet square, with a metal ring for a handle and no visible lock. I pulled. The hinges screamed, resisted, then gave way. Stairs descended into darkness. The air that rose was cool, dry, smelling of earth and something else, preservatives perhaps, or old wood. I found a flashlight in the barn's clutter, tested it, and started down. The stairs were stone, worn concave by generations of feet. They ended in a room larger than I expected, 20 feet square, with a ceiling high enough to stand comfortably. The walls were lined with shelves. The shelves were filled with jars, not mason jars, not Eileen's accumulated clutter. These were commercial preserving jars, thousands of them, labeled in handwriting that was not Eileen's, precise, architectural, dated from 1952 to 1987. The labels named varieties I'd never heard of: Brennan's Special, Mercer Gold, Pennsylvania Red, and beneath the shelves in wooden crates stamped with federal logos, seeds. Hundreds of packets, organized by type and year, some dating to the 1940s. A library of agriculture, a vault of biodiversity that predated the term. Maya was beside me, her hand finding mine in the darkness. "What is this place?" I didn't know, but I recognized what it represented. Someone had been preparing for something. Someone had invested decades in preserving what others had abandoned. We needed to know who and why. Eileen was not forthcoming. When we showed her the cellar, her face closed like a door. "That's my father's work," she said. "Grandfathers before him. They were foolish men who thought the world would end and they'd be heroes." "These are heirloom varieties," I said. I'd been reading, using the phone Eileen reluctantly allowed us to charge. "Some of these tomatoes don't exist anymore. These peppers, there are seed companies that would pay thousands for these genetics." "They're seeds," Eileen said. "You plant them, they grow. You don't sell them. You don't make a fuss. You just keep them alive." "Why?" "Because that's what Brennans do." She turned away, ending the conversation. "You want to be useful, inventory what's down there, see what's still viable." My father kept records. Find them. We found the records in a metal box beneath the bottom shelf, field notebooks spanning 3 generations, documenting planting dates, yields, pest resistance, flavor profiles. Scientific method applied to subsistence farming. Obsessive, detailed, passionate. Thomas Brennan, 1919–1987. He had started the collection during the Depression, salvaging varieties that neighbors were abandoning for commercial hybrids. He had continued through World War II, through the agricultural consolidation of the 1950s, through the rise of industrial farming that made his work seem quaint at best, insane at worst. His son, James, had continued the work until his death in 2001. Eileen had inherited the property, the cellar, the obligation. And she had maintained it in the only way she knew: silence, secrecy, refusal to engage with a world that had never valued what her family preserved. Maya and I spent that winter in the cellar. We learned to test seed viability, germination rates, vigor assessments, the careful protocols that Thomas had developed. We cataloged varieties, cross-referenced records, began to understand what we had found. It was not just a collection, it was a genetic arc. Tomatoes that resisted blights decades before commercial breeders developed solutions. Corn that grew in poor soil with minimal water. Beans that fixed nitrogen more efficiently than modern cultivars. Traits that had been lost to industrial agriculture's focus on yield and shelf life. And it was dying. Even in the dry darkness, seeds lost viability over time. The oldest collections, pre-1960, showed germination rates below 20%. The work of 3 generations was disappearing, cell by cell, year by year. We have to grow them, I told Eileen. Not all of them, but enough to regenerate the stock, enough to keep the lines alive. She looked at me with something that might have been hope, might have been fear. My father tried to get universities interested. Extension agents, seed companies, they all said the same thing: obsolete, inefficient, not worth the effort. That was 30 years ago, I said. Things have changed. People care about this now. Local food, biodiversity, climate adaptation. I don't care about trends, Eileen interrupted. I care about the work. You want to grow them, but don't expect applause, don't expect money. Just do the work. We did the work. That spring, Maya and I cleared a 1/4 acre behind the barn. We planted 80 varieties: tomatoes, peppers, beans, corn, squash, greens, selected for genetic diversity and viability urgency. We documented everything, continuing the notebooks that Thomas had started, adding our own observations in different colored ink. The learning curve was vertical. I had never grown anything. Maya had never paid attention to where food came from. We made mistakes, planting too early, watering too much, failing to recognize nutrient deficiencies until they became crises. But we learned. The seeds taught us, their responses to our care or neglect providing feedback that no book could match. Eileen watched without comment. She corrected our technique when it was dangerously wrong, offered tools from the barn's accumulation, accepted the eggs our chickens produced in exchange for our continued residence. But she didn't participate. The cellar was her burden, her inheritance, her wound. She had never been allowed to love it openly, and she didn't know how to start. By July, we had plants. By August, we had harvests. By September, we had data, germination rates, yield estimates, flavor assessments, pest resistance observations. The collection was coming alive, regenerating through our labor, becoming something more than preserved potential. And we had attention. A local newspaper reporter, working on a story about heirloom agriculture, found our names in an online forum where I'd posted questions about seed viability testing. She drove to Mercer, photographed the cellar, interviewed me with Maya sitting silent beside me. The story ran in October. It was sympathetic, slightly sensational. Orphan teenagers revive Depression-era seed vault, but it was accurate in its essentials. We received emails from seed companies, from academic researchers, from homesteaders who wanted to grow what we were growing. Eileen was furious. "I told you not to make a fuss. I told you to do the work quietly." "The work needs more than quiet," I said. "These varieties are dying. We can't save them alone. We need help funding, land, expertise." "You need attention," Eileen snapped. "You need to be special. My father needed that too. He died disappointed, Noah. The world didn't end. His seeds weren't needed. He was just a man with a basement full of old jars." "He was preserving options," I said, "for a future he couldn't see. That's not foolishness. That's hope." Eileen didn't respond. She walked to the cellar, descended the stairs, and stayed there for 3 hours. When she emerged, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "There's a property tax bill coming. I can't pay it. The state will take the land, sell it to developers. Everything my family built will be plowed under for housing lots." She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since we'd arrived. "You want to save the seeds. Save the land first." The tax bill was $12,000, due in March. Eileen's pension covered her living expenses barely, but the property had been in tax delinquency before, penalties compounding. The county wanted its money or it wanted the land. We had 3 months. I was 17, legally able to work but not to sign contracts. Maya was 13, brilliant and silent, and watching me with eyes that expected me to solve everything. I started with the attention the article had generated. I contacted seed companies again, not asking for money, but offering partnerships, exclusive access to varieties in exchange for regeneration support. I reached out to academic programs, offering the collection as a research resource. I applied for every grant I could find related to agricultural preservation, biodiversity, rural development. Mostly I was ignored. A few responses were polite rejections. One seed company offered $500 for marketing rights to 3 tomato varieties, a sum that was simultaneously insulting and tempting. Then Dr. Sarah Chen called. She ran a sustainable agriculture program at a state university 3 hours away. She had read the article, checked our germination data, and driven to Mercer without announcing herself. "I've been in the cellar," she said, when I found her standing in Eileen's kitchen, drinking tea from a jelly jar. "Your great-uncle Thomas was a phenotypic selection genius. Some of these varieties show resistance patterns I've never seen documented. The corn alone, do you know what drought tolerance like that is worth?" "I know they're dying," I said. "I know we need money to save the land, or the collection gets dispersed and probably destroyed." Dr. Chen set down her tea. "I can help with the land. My program has access to conservation easement funding. We can pay the taxes, place a permanent agricultural protection on the property, in exchange for research access and educational use. You'd retain ownership, you'd just be agreeing not to develop." "Eileen owns the property," I said. "Eileen is signing the paperwork next week," Dr. Chen said. "We spoke this morning. She's tired, Noah. She's been carrying this alone for 20 years. She wants to know it will continue." I found Eileen in the cellar, sitting on the bottom step, surrounded by her father's jars. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because you needed to fight for it," she said. "I needed to see if you would. My father fought his whole life and no one joined him. I thought maybe you'd be different, but I had to know. You were testing us. I was waiting for you to become real." She turned to look at me and her face was wet. "You and Maya. You're the first ones who saw what this was, who didn't think we were crazy, hoarding old seeds, who wanted to continue the work instead of just inheriting the obligation." She stood slowly, using the railing that Thomas had installed in 1965. "I'm giving you the cellar, Noah. The records, the seeds, everything. Dr. Chen will help with the legalities, but the work," she paused, hand on my shoulder. "The work is yours now. Don't do it for attention. Don't do it for money. Do it because it's necessary, because someone has to. We saved the land. The conservation easement paid the taxes, placed the property under permanent agricultural protection, and established a framework for the collection's continued existence. Dr. Chen's program provided technical support, germplasm storage expertise, connections to a network of seed savers and researchers that spanned the continent. Maya and I formalized what we'd started. We called it the Brennan Seed Project, a nonprofit dedicated to regenerating and distributing heirloom varieties with documented resilience traits. We hired our first employee at 16 and 13, legally complicated, solved by Dr. Chen's program acting as fiscal sponsor. Eileen lived another 3 years. She never became warm, never learned to express the pride she clearly felt, but she participated. She taught us to recognize varieties by leaf shape, to predict weather from cloud patterns, to listen to the land in ways that weren't in Thomas's notebooks. She died in her sleep, in the room where we'd first stayed, surrounded by the accumulation of her family's work. We buried her beside her father, in the cemetery where Brennans had been interred since 1847. Maya placed a jar of Mercer Gold tomatoes on the grave, Eileen's favorite, though she'd never said so directly. I was 20 when we received our first major grant. 21, when Maya and I presented at a National Sustainable Agriculture Conference. Our story of emancipation and inheritance and accidental preservation, resonating with audiences who saw their own struggles in ours. 22, when the collection topped 10,000 accessions, making us one of the largest private seed banks in the country. But the numbers don't matter. What matters is the morning Maya and I spent in the cellar last month, inventorying the 2024 harvest, updating the notebooks that now span 4 generations of handwriting. What matters is the farmer in Kansas who called to say our drought-resistant corn had saved his crop. What matters is the community garden in Pittsburgh, where refugee families are growing varieties from their home countries, seeds that traveled through our cellar to reach them. What matters is that 2 children who were told they were worthless, too old to keep, too much trouble to save, found something worth saving and became worthy in the process. I want to stop here and speak to you directly. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story isn't really about seeds or farming or agricultural history. It's about what happens when you're discarded, by family, by systems, by a world that measures value in convenience, and you find something that needs you anyway. Maya and I didn't save the Brennan collection because we were special. We saved it because we had nowhere else to be, no one else to be responsible for, and we stumbled into work that was bigger than our survival. The seeds didn't care about our trauma. They just needed care, and in giving it we became something we hadn't been before, necessary. Have you ever had that experience? Of finding purpose in something that didn't judge you, that just required your attention and effort. It's not romantic. It's hard and boring and frequently fails, but it's real. It's the thing that gets you up when the self-worth isn't there. If this resonates, if you've ever been the one who stayed, who kept something alive because no one else would, I want to hear from you. The comments are open. This is a place for people who know that value isn't assigned by systems that discard you. It's built slowly through work that matters. Now, back to the story. The Brennan Seed Project operates from the same farmhouse, where Maya and I arrived with garbage bags in desperation. We've renovated the barn into a processing facility, added climate-controlled storage, built a greenhouse where we can test varieties year-round. The cellar is still the heart, still cool, still dark, still lined with jars that represent decades of selection and hope. Maya runs operations now. She's 20, studying plant genetics in college, combining the empirical methods Thomas developed with modern genomic tools. I'm 24, focused on outreach and policy, fighting for the legal frameworks that allow seed saving to continue in an agricultural system, increasingly controlled by intellectual property and corporate consolidation. We live in the farmhouse. We share meals with staff and researchers and the volunteers who arrive every spring to help with planting. We've created the family we didn't have, chosen, deliberate, bound by shared work rather than shared blood. Last month, a woman contacted us. She'd been in the same group home as Maya, same year, same discharge. She'd heard our story, found our website, recognized something in our description of finding value in abandoned things. "I don't have a cellar," she wrote, "but I have a backyard and I need something to grow." We sent her seeds. Not just any seeds, the varieties that had taught us, that had survived neglect and rediscovery, that carried stories in their genetics. We sent her tomatoes that Thomas had selected for flavor in 1958, beans that had fed Brennan's through the Depression, corn that had waited 40 years in darkness for someone to plant it again. She wrote back with photographs, small plants in yogurt containers, then larger ones in raised beds, then a harvest, modest, proud, alive. "I didn't know I could do this," she said. "I didn't know anything could need me this way." That's the inheritance, finally understood, not the property, not the collection, not the recognition we've received. It's the knowledge that purpose can be found, that work can be meaningful, that the things others discard, seeds, children, stories, can become foundations if someone chooses to value them. Maya and I were kicked out at 16 and 12. We found a hidden cellar full of old seeds. We did the work, continue the work, we'll do the work until we can't. And what that cellar became, what we became together, has changed everything. If you have a story about finding purpose in unexpected places, about becoming necessary to something that needed saving, I want to hear it. Share it below. Let's make this a place where we recognize that our value isn't determined by the systems that discard us, but by the work we choose to do and the lives we choose to touch. Thank you for listening. There are so many more seeds to plant.